in haste, with only 900 men, leaving behind one full company and a skeleton of others. Those left behind, some 140 men, would be incorporated into the newly forming Mountain Legion. The 120th officially mustered into service on August 25th, 1862, sojourning with Colonel George H. Sharp before the 120th's departure was his second cousin, Jacob Sharp. Jacob Sharp attended the prestigious United States Military Academy at West Point for 2 years before transferring and graduating from Dartmouth College in 1856. He briefly served in the 20th New York Militia as first lieutenant before transferring to the 56th New York as major. Sharp received flattering testimonials for his coolness and bravery in the Battle of Fair Oaks. After an attack of illness, Jacob Sharp returned to Kingston, positioning himself for promotion. As the 120th New York quickly filled its quota, Jacob Sharp turned to the newly growing Mountain Legion in late July of 1862, which began its fresh push for new recruits. The Mountain Legion adopted the nickname from the surrounding Shawangunk and Catskill mountain ranges. Like the 120th New York, this regiment would draw men from Ulster and Greene counties. Men from Kingston, New Paltz, Shawangunk, and neighboring townships would line up at their local recruiting offices and sign the dotted line to preserve the Union. These were farmers, merchants, storekeepers, blacksmiths, and students. They ranged from ages 16 to 45 years old. Their patriotism echoed off the monuments of their Revolutionary War ancestors, which reverberated off the Shawangunk Mountains that cascade our very towns and villages. Jacob Sharp, the man who most believed would command this new regiment of heroes, would instead be commissioned lieutenant colonel of the Mountain Legion. New York State would appoint a tall 6'1", 45-year-old lawyer who was politically connected but had zero military experience. His name was Erastus Cook. Cook possessed unflinching patriotism. He was instrumental in 1861, peddling rousing speeches throughout Ulster County, which inspired many to enlist in the 20th New York Militia. Cook was the brother-in-law to Colonel Theodore Burr Gates, who commanded the 20th New York Militia. He was friends with Brigadier General Henry A. Sampson, who commanded the 8th Brigade of New York State Militia. Cook was extremely well-liked and highly networked in New York's elite circles, which advanced him to the commission of colonel, placing himself directly in command of the 156. On August 24th, 1862, New York State Governor Edwin D. Morgan dispatched an aide-de-camp to Kingston with note to Colonels George H. Sharp and Erastus Cook. The note contained a list of available regimental numbers. From this list, Colonel George H. Sharp chose the number 120 to align itself with the famed 20th New York Militia. Colonel Erastus Cook chose the number 156 to align itself with the celebrated 56th New York, nicknamed 10th Legion. Colonels Sharp and Cook wanted to show reverence and solidarity to the local regiments first in the field. The 156th New York would be the third and final infantry regiment established here in Ulster County. The 156th would assemble here in Kingston at Camp Sampson, where drilling quickly commenced to turn civilian into soldier. The first group to enlist were known as the New Paltz Volunteers. This group formed Company A and was commanded by Captain Ferdinand Griggs. His lieutenants were Peter Lefebvre and Peter Elting, both Huguenot descendants whose families founded New Paltz in the 1600s. Also in Company A was Charles J. Acker, founder of the New Paltz Times newspaper. He would act as field correspondent throughout the war and would send home detailed stories and noteworthy events of the Mountain Legion. Together, Company A would form one of the largest in the 156, totaling 97 men. By November of 1862, recruiting efforts for the Mountain Legion had stalled. Though amassing an impressive 7 full companies, A through G, roughly 700 men, the 156 fell short, needing the required 10 full companies to officially muster in as a regiment. On November 13th, with Washington's urgent need to quickly deploy troops to the front, New York State hastened 3 companies from the then forming 175th New York to merge with the 156. These men hailed from Castleton, Northfield, Hillsdale, and surrounding townships throughout Staten Island. They were predominantly German and Irish immigrants who made their living as factory workers, farmers, and merchants. At first, these Staten Islanders were obviously very disgruntled. After all, they wanted to start a regiment of their own. To prevent any hostility within the ranks, New York State commissioned Staten Island's very own Louis Shafter to the field grade rank of major. On Tuesday, November 11th, the Mountain Legion marched to the Roundout Ferry. After crossing the Hudson River to Rhinebeck, they took passage at 8 o'clock on board the steamship Rip Van Winkle and sailed for New York City. They arrived at 9 a.m. the next morning and marched to the Park Barracks at City Hall, where they remained until companies H, I, and K from Staten Island joined them. On November 17, 1862, Ulster County's finest, with elements from Greene and Richmond counties, were officially sworn in and received their Enfield rifle muskets. They had just over 1,000 men. After weeks of encampment and uncertain of their destination, they finally boarded the steamer M. Sanford at Battery Park on December 4th with roughly 800 men. The regiment was to sail under sealed orders as part of General Nathaniel P. Banks's expedition. However, there was one major problem: desertion. Soldiers could easily slip by guards and blend in with city population. Just 2 days before the men boarded the M. Sanford, Lieutenant Isaac Signer of Company F brought in 11 deserters. Throughout the war, the 156th would dispatch squads of soldiers to retrieve these fugitives. They were successful on many occasions. On Thursday, December 4th, the Mountain Legion set sail for the theater of war. Many men never left the confines of their hometown, let alone voyage out to sea before. This was an entirely new experience for them. It was an exciting opportunity to see the nation. As Manhattan faded beyond the horizon, the view of home disappeared. The reality settled in. They were truly headed for the seat of war. There was no turning back. For many, they would never return. The men sought comfort with their new Bibles, which were gifted to every man in the regiment just 3 months prior by the Ulster County Bible Society. Blue skies, calm ocean waters, and a slight breeze of wind helped the men of the 156th to settle in. With heightened anticipation, the sealed orders were finally read out loud. The men were headed to Louisiana. After several days at sea, the M. Sanford began to struggle off the coast of Cape Hatteras, South Carolina. Strong gales of wind staggered their voyage southward. Heavily loaded with soldiers, mules, and supplies, the steamship floundered in the tough sea. The men were seasick and stricken with fear. After the brief storm off Cape Hatteras, the men resettled by occupying their time playing cards and reading old newspaper articles and riding home to loved ones. On the perfect morning of Wednesday, December 10th, 1862, a calm ocean without a wave in sight, the unthinkable happened. The men were jostled, the ship reared, and all on board quickly realized they had run aground on a coral reef just off the coast of Florida. Chaos immediately ensued. However, officers quickly regained control of the Pandemonium, distress signals were deployed, and after a few hours were rescued by the USS Gemsbach and supply steamer Blackstone. Peter Lefevre, first lieutenant in Company A, professed, in his own words, "We are all safe, and for all I can see, contented and happy. Providence has surrounded us with favorable circumstances." The 156 sailed just a short distance to Key West, where they would spend the next 12 days resupplying and training while they waited for the arrival of the USS McClellan. Upon the ship's arrival at Key West, the troops were loaded on board. Colonel Erastus Cook took a commanding position atop a ladder on deck, and while issuing orders for all to file in, Cook lost his balance and fell to the deck below, severely injuring his shoulder. Unable to continue with the voyage, he was sent home on a 60-day leave of absence. The men of the regiment were uncertain of his return. The command of the Mountain Legion devolved upon the well-respected, battle-tested Lieutenant Colonel Jacob Sharp. On Christmas morning, the McClellan sailed up the mouth of the Mississippi River. The men began to take in their first sights of Louisiana. Philip Miller, private in Company I, noted, in his own words, "We came in sight of the plantations and large orange groves. It would make your mouth water to see them. The trees are about the size of a peach tree. The oranges are so thick and the lettuce so green, it's the nicest thing I ever saw grow. This was the sunny South indeed, as the men observed a whole new world far from home. By evening, the McClellan anchored opposite New Orleans, and the men bore witness to the magnificent beauty of the city. The next day, the 156 steamed 5 miles upriver, finally disembarked, and marched to Camp Mansfield in a town called Carlton, located 8 miles north of New Orleans. The camp had at one time been occupied by the infamous 1st Louisiana Tiger Regiment and was well adapted for drilling. However, there was one major problem: flooding. Torrential rain flooded the camp of the 156 just days into their stay. The change in water, the dampness of the lowland, and the constant drilling started to thin the ranks of the Mountain Legion. Ransom Anderson of Warsing, New York, private in Company D, was only 20 years old. He was the first man in the regiment to pass away from disease in Louisiana on July 16, 1863.